My guest today, Urs Koenig, argues in his new book, Radical Humility: Be a Badass Leader and a Good Human, that humble leadership creates better products, stronger teams, and a superior organization, and ultimately helps you become a more empathetic person. The days when aggressive command and control style leaders prevailed are long gone. The time for humble leadership is now. And today we will discuss the shifts you need to make to get there. This is E3, Engage and Empower with Empathy. Hi, Urs. It's so nice to have you on this podcast today. I've been looking forward to this conversation for months now. I think we scheduled this probably back in June. So I've been eagerly awaiting this conversation, and I know my listeners will be excited to hear what you have to say. And I thought the best place to start off, actually, before we launch into the book that you just published, is your really cool background. And I'm going to be honest with you, Urs, when I was preparing the script for this conversation, I really struggled with how to introduce you. You've worn so many different leadership hats throughout your career. So I was asking myself, okay, do I call Urs executive coach, keynote speaker, ultra endurance champion, father, former United Nations peacekeeper, author? And I do believe your diverse background has contributed to the richness of the book that you published, Radical Humility, which we'll get to in a second. Could you talk a little bit about your background and how it inspired you to write the book, Radical Humility?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Rebecca. I too have been looking forward to this conversation very much. So, yeah, I have a very eclectic background, as you pointed out. I was an academic many years ago. I wrote a PhD thesis in geography, of all things. Can you believe it? And then I was an academic, postdoc, and a lecturer, assistant professor at university. I have the ultra endurance piece. I actually started out as a cross-country skier. I grew up in Switzerland, was a competitive cross-country skier, and then got into long ultra endurance racing, multi-day bike races, 500 to 3,000 miles, and lots of adventure races, which, we can talk about. That really teaches you how to fail successfully. So that was one other aspect of my life. I've been an executive coach or in leadership development for the best part of the last 20 years. First as a coach, and now primarily as a keynote speaker. And then we can talk about my missions. At 50, I decided to go back into the military after having been out for 22 years, talking about the humbling experience that was. So I joined the NATO peacekeeping force in the Balkans. And then 3 years ago, I was in the Middle East for a year, where apparently I did do a terrible job seeing what's going on right now. That's a whole different conversation, right? In my personal life, I'm a son, I am a brother, I have got 2 teenage boys. So through all this sort of diverse, eclectic background, I've always been drawn to how do I achieve kick-ass or badass results while still be a good human being? So you can imagine ultra-endurance competition, even academia, and certainly the military. It's no nonsense, bottom line, and ultra-endurance competition, also the military, certainly a bit of a macho culture as well. And so how do I, in an environment like that, achieve strong results while at the same time be a good human being? Talk about in the book, Tough on Results, 10 Drunk People. That truly, if I may say so, is me. That's who I am as a person. I'm a deeply relational person. At the same time, I want to, do hard stuff and achieve cool things. And so, and then you asked about how I came to write the book. I was always drawn to humble people in the ultra endurance world. I was drawn to people or competitors who let their legs do the talking versus, their big mouth. And so I had a sort of a draw to these humble people, but I never really studied humility as a leadership trait in any seriousness until about 10 years ago. Edgar Schein and his son Peter Schein published the groundbreaking book Humble Leadership, which I was eating up. And I'm like, oh, there is something here that was published about 10 years ago. And then I did some more research and reading, and then ironically going back into the military. So in 2017, into Kosovo with NATO, with the UN, into the Middle East, actually showed me that the best commanders I've had were deeply humble leaders. They had great self-awareness. They led relationally, what I call leading relationally versus only by expertise. And they made it safe for their people to fail, the growth mindset, clearly confined and safe environment. So when I came back from the second mission, I went, you know what? I have something here. This humility piece in leadership, there is something here. And that's when I really started in all seriousness to the research. And of course, the outcome of that whole quest is the book that just got published.
Wow. I love that story. And I always like to ask people how they came to publishing a book, because there's always an amazing journey that leads you to that point. It's not like you woke up one day and decided, okay, I'm going to publish a book on humility.
Well, actually, Rebecca, so you might have some listeners who have written books or are thinking about it. I've been told for years I should write a book. And I'll be honest with you. The cynic in me went, do I really want to write another leadership book that says the same thing? Nobody reads anyway. But when I came back from that mission, I really felt, because of this unique combo of the military background and experience with humility, like that I have something unique to say and a story only I can tell. And that's what made me actually in the end really decide to write the book.
I love that. And I'm going to actually put the book up on the screen so everyone can see. So this is Urs's book, Radical Humility. I actually listened to the audio version that Urs himself narrates. I wanted to hear Urs's voice speaking to me as I was listening and then taking notes in the physical version. So let's talk a little bit about the section on vulnerability. I thought that'd be a great way to start our conversation, since you and I don't know each other personally. And you talked about how high-profile leaders like Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella are avoiding the trap of chasing perfection and starting to embrace vulnerability. In a previous episode, I actually interviewed a professor at the University of Chicago, and he recently published a book on perfectionism and how it's bad for management. And his extensive experience working with people who have severe cases of it really support your argument that aggressive command and control culture that you have seen over the last decades in corporate America should really be replaced with leaders who embrace humility and vulnerability. So in the spirit of vulnerability, I'm going to execute the penny exercise that you mentioned in the book. You mentioned that you use this exercise as a way to kick off facilitation with teams or during your coaching sessions. Before we get into it, could you just explain what this exercise is and why you do it?
Absolutely. So the exercise is, we all get a penny. And as we all know, there's years imprinted on the penny. And so everybody shares a meaningful event that happened to them during that year. And so I'm always amazed, and I ask the leader to go first and share. And it has to be something meaningful. And I'm always amazed how people, even a team that's worked together for quite some time, actually, they learn something new about their teammates. And what happens when we share something meaningful with maybe a bit of vulnerability, the other team members, and I ask the leader to go first by design, because whatever the leader models then gets mirrored by the team. And so, we talk about the vulnerability loop. I display a bit of vulnerability, you pick up on that, you reciprocate and mirror that, and then a deeper level of trust is established. And so it sets a wonderful stage for a more meaningful and trusting environment as we go into a facilitation of a retreat or a team coaching engagement. So that's the penny exercise.
That's great. So I have a penny with me here. It's a little old and dirty, which would indicate that it's not a recent one. And it has the year 2004 on it. So I can start.
Because you're the leader, Rebecca. That's why. You start because you're the leader. That's right.
I'm setting an example. Yes. Being vulnerable for the team. So in 2004, I was 20 years old. And I was studying abroad for the first time. And this was the first time I had left the United States for an extended period of time. Now, I grew up in the Midwest, so not even in a big metropolitan area in the US, nothing resembling Europe. And so it was a big culture shock for me. Although I had a strong command of the French language, I was studying in northern France. Nothing could have prepared me for comprehending business lectures at a university conducted in the French language and taking exams in French and coping with the day-to-day activities of going to the post office and buying groceries and just doing the normal things that you do, but as a foreigner in a country that's not your own. I went through a lot of self-reflection that year. I even did a lot of trying to understand my own sexual identity. And so there were a lot of questions I was asking myself that year. And it resulted in really transforming me as a person. So when I came back to the US, I was so thirsty for learning and understanding about the world. That propelled me into studying in the Netherlands for grad school and then moving to France for my first job. And I ended up spending quite a bit of time in Europe because that one study abroad experience really triggered my thirst for knowledge and understanding the world better outside the state of Ohio, where I was from and where I grew up. So it really shaped a big part of my life.
I love that. And you said it was hard, right?
Yes, it was very hard.
Exactly right. and you stuck with it, and you didn't just come home when the first hard thing happened. So that's really cool.
How about you? What happened to you in 2004? Anything interesting?
In 2004, I picked my own penny, Rebecca.
Oh, you did? Oh, cool.
Actually, I can do 2004. That's no problem. In 2004, I was older than you, Rebecca, but I just moved a couple of years earlier from Australia, where I spent 7 years for my academic work and then went to business school, and I moved to Seattle. And I started my executive coaching business in 2002, just 2 years earlier. And 2004 was really a hard year because I moved from Australia, new continent. I started a new business, new relationship, and I didn't know anybody. And so, as you and I know, building any sort of professional service business is based on personal relationships. And so I also was way too aggressively invested in the stock market, in the dot-com bubble burst. And so I lost a lot of money, which I was supposed to have to live from while I built my business. So I had many sleepless nights in 2004 as I was growing my business with cash flow issues, and it impacted the romantic relationship I was in. So it was a very, very tough year, actually, 2004 in Seattle, as I look back. And yes, I too stuck with it as hard as it was. Oh, and, eventually was able to turn my business into a business that was supporting me. So that was my 2004.
Wow. So a really great example of how hardship propelled you forward in a positive way.
In a positive way. Yeah. But I wanted to give up on a few occasions. I'll be totally honest. There was a few times when, you know what, I'm just going to get a job. Like, that's it. But I didn't. So, yeah.
I understand that feeling entirely. There were several times during my year abroad where my parents were even encouraging me to come back home when I was struggling mentally. Like, you can come back. And I said, no, I want to finish this out. I need to finish this out. Yeah. I think we all know deep down when we're going through hard times that we know that we're going to come out the end of it at some point. It's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
And that it will make us stronger and that we will be able to learn from it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Can I say something on vulnerability quickly, Rebecca, if I may?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I often get a bit of pushback on that notion. And I want to be sort of clear of how I look at vulnerability, just super briefly. So if this is not about, I joke about this, like starting every meeting crying and my parents never really loved me. Like, that's not it. That's not it. Because I have people who sort of think that's what it is. I have to lay open my deepest secrets and my darkest fears. No, it's not. It's about being at eye level with my teammates. And a wonderful way to display some vulnerability, and a very appropriate way, is actually to share a personal goal, like something we're working towards, which sort of shows that we're two are work in progress and we're never done. So if I share with my teammates, hey, I'm working on X, Y, Z, like, that's a bit of vulnerability. By the way, they already know that I'm not perfect. Why? They work with me every single day. So simply me owning my shortcomings, it makes me relatable. I mean, I always say we all admire perfection from a distance, but nobody can relate to it. And Nadella, who you mentioned earlier, and I'm sure you remember that story, he owned when he misspoke about women just trust their karma and everything will be fine. You remember that, right? With the salary conversation? Yeah.
I do.
The same day, he apologized, he owned it. He talked about what he's going to do to change. Like, that is appropriate vulnerability, taking responsibility for your stuff. And, he built huge trust across the business world, actually, and the way he handled that.
Yeah, well, I think in general, he has transformed the culture at Microsoft, and there are books written about it.
Absolutely.
I read his book too. It's really incredible where he's coming from. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about a part of your book that really resonated with me personally. And I'm sure some of my listeners will also resonate with this. I'm going to read a passage from your book, actually, because I don't want to get it wrong. I think this really encapsulates the culture of busyness that we've established in the United States. So the passage from your book says, "My plea goes utterly against the grain of our mainstream culture, where being busy is often equated with being important and productive. As a society, we are addicted to busyness. It is a badge of honor. Just think about how we introduce ourselves at networking events or cocktail parties. Hi, I'm Urs. How are you? Hi, I'm Carol. Nice to meet you, Carol. What do you do? Nice to meet you too, Urs. I run a staffing agency in Chicago. How's that going for you? I'm super busy. Well, that's great. You're busy. Better than the other way around." And when I read that, I literally fell off my seat because it sounded exactly like every conversation I have at networking events. No joke. And I'm wondering, why you included this excerpt in your book, and what would you recommend for a culture that really promotes busyness as a form of productivity?
I shared I have teenage boys. It's embedded in, college application process, right? You have to have 7 million extracurricular activities, right? And so the first thing I say, busy does not mean being productive. It's not the same thing. So busy does not mean we're actually achieving what we need to achieve. And so I think a core element here is that, and the outstanding book, which I quote in my book, Essentialism by McEwen, is the sort of the groundbreaking work on this. We must have the humility to know that we can't do everything. We simply can't, but we can do almost anything we put our hearts and minds to. And so this notion we need to go from it's all important and I can do everything to only a few things really matter. And how clear am I about what really matters? It's been famously said, if you have 5 or more than 5 or more than 3, I would argue, priorities, you have none. So asking myself, when I do this journaling, what are the 3 most important things in my business, in my life, today, this week, this year? And I actually outline a sort of a almost painfully pragmatic way in the book in how I break my yearly goals down into monthly goals, into weekly goals, into daily goals. And so the idea is to show me your calendar and I'll tell you your priorities. And so having that crystal clear clarity around what is most important, and then do I spend time and effort doing that? I mean, I literally sometimes look at how I spent my days. I look back, what meetings did I have? What did I do when I had quiet time on my own? Where did I travel to? Does it support one of my 3 goals? Does it make a meaningful contribution towards that? That's sort of a big picture. Some concrete tools. I mean, this has been written about many times. Stop doing lists. We all have to-do lists. When's the last time you kept a stop doing list? The things you do out of habit, guilt. That's my favorite. Guilt. Or frankly, sometimes intellectual laziness, because I've always done it that way. And so let's keep a stop doing list. And I think that's borrowed from McEwen as well. Think of it like cleaning out your time management closet. Do I love it? Do I wear it once a month? If no, it's gone. Same with your time management system. Does it serve what I'm really trying to achieve here? And if it doesn't, it needs to be killed. I have some clients who actually have stopped doing, where a part of their department meeting is the stop doing portion, where they talk about which projects do we need to kill, because they just don't go anywhere. And there's always someone's darling, right? And we hate to kill our darlings. We all do, right? So it needs to go. And so let's start having that conversation. So that's what I mean when I talk about busy does not equate being productive.
I love that. I've also learned how important space is too. The prioritization piece is key, but then also creating space for deep thinking, for reflection, for meditation, whatever it may be.
I love that. So I often think about this in sort of 3 cycles. It's the micro cycle every day. What do I build in? It could be 2 minutes of focused breathing / meditation in my car between meetings. I do a power nap after lunch every day. I've done it in peacekeeping missions, 10 minutes. I have a yoga mat, I roll it out. Like it's almost every day, but close to it. So these micro breaks, and then the meso ones are, the week. Like, do I have one day per week where it's idle time, right? It's not super structured, or I do something totally different. I go outside. I love ski mountaineering. Do that. And then the macro is every 3 months, I need like a week off, or whatever it is. Every 6 months, I take 3 weeks off. So thinking of micro, meso, and macro in terms of the recharging.
That also makes it seem more achievable too when you're looking at it at the micro level and the macro level. So it doesn't seem like this daunting task. Let's talk a little bit about crisis situations. I love what you talked about in your book about building strong relationships and the importance of relationship building. And in chapter 6, you actually reference the German expression in Krisen Köpfe kennen. And that is a principle used in crisis situations because your strong pre-existing relationships will carry you through that crisis. And you gave some really good examples too. Could you tell us a little bit more about this German-born concept and provide a real-world scenario? Maybe the one that you gave in the book.
Yeah, and your pronunciation is outstanding. It's very good.
Thank you. Danke.
In bitte, in Krisen Köpfe kennen, literally translated means in crisis, know the heads, as in know the people, right? And so the idea is that, and I'll tell the story in a second, but in crisis, pre-existing relationships are often more important than detailed flowcharts or orders or processes, because it allows you to pick up the phone, call the right person, cut through red tape, and get stuff done. I often talk about building relationships as a preemptive move. We never know who we have to rely on when the famous stuff hits the fan, as it always does. And if we've built those relationships preemptively, then we can rely on those people. And so that's the notions of the example I give in the book is a crisis we had in Kosovo, where one of our soldiers was in a life-threatening situation. He had a heart condition that needed open heart surgery. Now we're in Kosovo. It's 11 o'clock at night. This news comes in, and the decision has to be made by my commander. Do we have the soldier get operated on in Kosovo, where we don't know the hospitals, and the hospitals we've been to are in dismal condition? Patients have to bring their own medical supplies. They walk across the street to the pharmacy, including like scalpels and the whole shazam, like IV bags. So not a good situation. And we don't know the hospitals. So surgery in one of those, or do we fly the patient back to Switzerland, airlift him back, which he probably doesn't have the time, actually. So we're not quite sure. So the commander has to make this call. And, let's ask ourselves, what would I decide? One of my teammates, surgery in hospital, we have no idea about, most likely dismal, or fly back, but he might actually pass away during the flight. So the commander tells me afterwards how he handled it. Because he had such good and strong pre-existing relationships, he picked up the phone, at midnight, called the ambassador to Kosovo of Switzerland, who he knew because he regularly meets with him, and they built a relationship, so he can call him at midnight and asks him for advice on these hospitals. The ambassador knows one very good private hospital, which, dare I say, is mainly frequented by rich expats and the UN personnel, and assures the commander with the best surgeon in Kosovo, who the ambassador knows, we can get this done. It's going to be good. And it's going to be safe. And so the ambassador hops on the phone, talks to the surgeon. Again, they've built a relationship. The surgeon assembles his surgery team. So that happens. That's sort of contingency plan 1. The second contingency plan is to fly the patient back to Switzerland. Because again, my commander has built a strong, meaningful relationship with the Italian contingent commander, another military guy. He calls him again at midnight. He says, I know you have a plane on the ground in Kosovo. Can you cut through some red tape and put it on high alert just in case we decide to fly him back? The contingent commander, the colonel, gets it done. The plane's ready to go. At the same time, my commander calls our Swiss International Command. And because the good relationship he has there, the only jet available is the jet of the Swiss executive branch. And that's also gets put on high alert. So all this is to say, this is all possible because my commander, who, by the way, was one of the best commanders I've ever had, I talk about some of the interactions he and I had together, because he made the effort to build collaborative relationships. Did he want to go to, yet another networking event? Did he want to always go and meet the ambassador in the middle of the day, drive through traffic, for lunch? No, he didn't feel like it probably at times, but he did it because he knew it would always pay in the end. The outcome of the story is that the patient, was actually flown back to Switzerland on the jet of the executive branch of the Swiss government and made a full recovery. So the point of the story, which is an important point though, is that the value of pre-existing relationships in Krisen Köpfe kennen is the key to success when things move fast. And maybe one just quick other example. When COVID first hit, which organizations quickly adapted? Those organizations that were well networked. I need to all of a sudden process all my payments online. I call up the IT and the finance person who I talked about our kids' soccer game last week or whatever, right? And so we get stuff done. There's some research showing that those organizations that had deep, meaningful relationships, deeply networked, actually those cultures came out stronger out of COVID, and those that didn't came out weaker. So anyway, as you can tell, I'm very passionate about relationship building with a business purpose. We don't do this because we want to be nice or liked or kind. These are all good benefits, and it's the right thing to do. We do it because it builds trust, engagement, and commitment. So, talk about relationship building with a business purpose, and it always pays in the long run.
Yeah, I think your point here is that building those relationships with true intention is critical. So it's not just, I'm going to network with as many people as possible and have as many people on my side as possible. It's really having a genuine intention of who you want to interact with and make it meaningful. And then in the end, the results pay off.
So you're absolutely right. So thank you for clarifying that. I think that's very important. And, I often say, and I do mean this, if you're in a leadership position, you have to love people. I really mean this. And so you don't have to be an extrovert. You don't have to be an extrovert, but you have to fundamentally enjoy getting to know and learn about people. And you're absolutely right. It needs to be genuine. I really want to know what's going on for you, Rebecca. I really want to understand where you want to go next in your career. I really want to understand how I can support you in your job hunt, like from a genuine place, because I really, really do care. And so that's why I put forward to be a bit black and white. If you don't love people, don't lead people. That's totally fine. You can do other stuff. Be an outstanding IC, an outstanding individual contributor. That's totally fine. But in a leadership position, it's people business everywhere, even in the military.
And that is a wonderful way to wrap up this conversation. I really appreciate you being here, Urs. And I'm just going to bring your book up once again. If you want to be a badass people leader who loves people and takes care of people at work, which is what this podcast is all about, frankly, this book is for you. This was a really fun conversation, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you again soon.
Thank you. I enjoyed it a lot. Thanks, Rebecca.
This podcast is designed to help busy business leaders create an inspired and engaged workforce. I am building a community of like-minded leaders and experts who all share the same passion, taking care of people at work. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. If you know someone who I should interview or should be a part of this community, please connect with me on LinkedIn. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.